Hello, everyone. This is Gene Geog History, and today I'm going to go back to my 5 countries most similar to series, and the subject of this video is going to be Trinidad and Tobago, as I'm continuing with the Caribbean countries, especially since this channel is, or at least so far, is heavily Caribbean focused. So essentially, I'm going to compare Trinidad to 5 other countries or territories in some cases that are the most similar to it. I am using the site objectivelist.com to see what they came up with. So the top 5 will be based on demographics, culture, government, infrastructure, and geography, and there's going to be a total score that I will use to place the seasons, sorry, not the seasons, the countries or territories in first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. And then at the end, I'm going to briefly talk about the honorable mentions, which is essentially 6th to 10th. I'm going to format this similarly to how I formulated the Cuba one, more so than how I formatted the Jamaica and Haiti one. So let's get right to it. So at first place is Jamaica with a total score of 78, as you see here. I'm not shocked Jamaica's in the top 5 because Trinidad and Tobago was in the top 5 where Jamaica when I did that video. I'm pretty sure it was third. Don't quote me on that. I haven't really seen the positions since that video. But anyways, when it comes to the demographics, Trinidad and Tobago has 1.5 million people while Jamaica has 2.8 million. With Trinidad and Tobago, it's roughly equal Afro-Trinidadians and Indo-Trinidadians, each with 35% each when it comes to the overall population. Plus, the mixed population is about 20%, and the mixed population that I'm referencing is the Douglas population, which are people who are half Indian, half African, with smaller European, Chinese, Syrian, Lebanese, and indigenous groups. Overall, it's a multicultural society where no single group is the majority, while in Jamaica, it's a predominantly Afro-Jamaican. The population is predominantly Afro-Jamaican, with roughly around 90%, with smaller minorities of mixed race, i.e. mulatto, and Dougla, heck, even Malaysian as well. I'm referencing to Jamaican, Black, African, and Chinese. Those are the smaller mixed race groups, but it's mainly mulatto. Chinese, Indian, and European groups too. And of course, the mixed race groups includes those that I just listed. It is much more ethnically homogeneous than Trinidad. So just to bullet point the demographics with each country, Trinidad is diverse and balanced between African and Indian heritage, while Jamaica is overwhelmingly African descended. When it comes to the culture, Trinidad and Tobago is famous for carnival, calypso, soca, steel pan, which is the world's only acoustic instrument invented in the 20th century. That's actually very interesting. Well, Jamaica is a global cultural giant as it's the birthplace of reggae, dancehall, music, ska, and Rastafarianism. There are huge Indian contributions in Trinidad and Tobago, like chutney music, Diwali, Jose, curry, and roti. There is a much smaller Indian contribution in Jamaica, but curry and roti are huge in Jamaica too, and they got that from the Indo-Jamaicans. Jamaican patois is highly spoken and exported through music, film, and sports, even to people outside of Jamaica. The culture exports from Jamaica, i.e. Bob Marley, Usain Bolt, etc., give Jamaican outsized international influence, while the multicultural festivals and traditions are woven into the national life in Trinidad and Tobago. So the key contrast is Trinidad is mainly festival-driven, multicultural blend, though you could argue that Caravana and holidays like that have made their way outside of Trinidad and Tobago and outside the Caribbean in general. And it's a multicultural blend, while Jamaica is it is a globally dominant Afro-Caribbean cultural identity, or it has that. When it comes to the politics of both of them, Trinidad and Tobago is a parliamentary republic since 1976, and there's no British monarch, unlike Jamaica, which is a parliamentary constitutional monarchy, where the British monarch is still the head of state there. There are two-party systems in both Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago, though in the latter, the two-party politics often reflect the ethnic lines, i.e. Afro-Trinidadian versus Indo-Trinidadian support bases. I should do more research on that, actually. With Trinidad, the energy wealth makes it a regional economic power, but crime is a challenge. Crime is a challenge in Jamaica as well. Though there's stable democracy there, but like I briefly mentioned, there's persistent issues of crime, poverty, and economic inequality in Jamaica. So key contrast. Jamaica is a monarchy, tourism/remittance-driven economy, culturally unified but economically constrained, while Trinidad is a republic, oil-driven economy, and ethnic-based politics. The fourth category is the infrastructure, where Trinidad and Tobago is one of the most industrialized Caribbean nations thanks to the oil and natural gas that's present there, while the infrastructure in Jamaica is uneven, as there's a lot of infrastructure in developed tourist areas, so like Montego Bay and Kingston, but the rural areas are a lot weaker. In Trinidad and Tobago, there is solid energy infrastructure, relatively advanced transport and telecoms, and the urban issues with crime and congestion are present there, but strong compared to the region. Jamaica's infrastructure, when it comes to the economy, is a lot more reliant on tourism, bauxite, and remittances, and it's less industrialized than Trinidad. So the key contrasts is Trinidad is more energy rich, more industrialized, while Jamaica is more tourism dependent with Apache infrastructure. The fifth and final category is geography, where Trinidad and Tobago are two islands off the coast of Venezuela. Trinidad, the island is larger, it's more oil rich with mountains, plains, and swamps, while the smaller island of Tobago is more scenic and tourism heavy. Interesting. I would have thought it would have been the other way around when it comes to the tourism. Good to know. With Jamaica, it's a large mountainous island in the Greater Antilles. Trinidad's in the Lesser Antilles. Jamaica has fertile valleys, lush interior, and beaches where, while they are more exposed to hurricanes than Trinidad. Interesting, I did not know that. So the key contrast is has two mainland adjacent twin islands with oil wealth, while Jamaica is a larger mountainous island that is agriculturally fertile but hurricane prone. So here's the quick take for the overall comparison between the two countries. Trinidad and Tobago is a multicultural republic, industrialized economy via oil and gas, and has a rich festival culture via carnival, soca, and chutney music. While Jamaica is it is a culturally unified Afro-Caribbean monarchy, a global cultural superpower through reggae, Rastafarianism, and athletics. Tourism's huge there. It is a tourism and remittance-based economy. So that kind of makes sense why the demo's 15.5, because they are both Afro-descendant, though there's a bit more of an Indian population in Trinidad and Tobago, while Jamaica has less of that. The cultures are relatively similar, so are their governments. Infrastructures, there are a bit more differences, and the geography aren't that dissimilar as well. At second, I have the Bahamas, and this isn't a shocker to me at all, because I do believe this was also very high on the Jamaica list, or the Jamaica video that I did, so these three countries are relatively similar. And when it comes to the score, um, the Bahamas has 76.6 against Trinidad and Tobago, with relatively high scores in all of them, though the geography is a bit lower in comparison to everything else. So when it comes to the demographics, the Bahamas has 400K people, while Trinidad and Tobago has 1.5 million, so it has a lot more people. Of course, Trinidad is a balance between Afro-Trinidadians and Indo-Trinidadians, with minor demographics in others that include mixed and small European, Chinese, Syrian, Lebanese, and indigenous minorities. Overall, it's a very multicultural and multi-religious country via Christianity, Hinduism, and Islam. The Bahamas is predominantly Afro-Bahamian, with over 90% of the population being that, with a very small white, which is mainly British descendant, mixed, and immigrant minority, where Christianity generally dominates the religion. So the key contrast is Trinidad is highly diverse and there's no single majority, while the Bahamas is overwhelmingly African descended with smaller minorities. When it comes to the culture, Trinidad and Tobago is globally famous for its carnival, steel pan, calypso, soca, music, and chutney, with a strong Indian cultural imprint via Diwali, Jose, and cuisine, and it has a cultural identity that's rooted in a blend of African and Indian heritages, while the Bahamas is known for Jong Canoe, which is essentially festival with music, dance, and costumes, so they do have that similarity there. When it comes to its traditional music, it is rag and scrape, goombay, with a strong Afro-Caribbean identity, but it's less globally exported than Trinidad. or Jamaica's in comparison, which makes sense based on the population and them being scattered islands, the Bahamas overall. So the key contrast here is that Trinidad is multicultural festival. Sorry, it is a multicultural festival and music hub, while the Bahamas is more homogeneous Afro-Caribbean culture, or it is a more homogeneous Afro-Caribbean culture with drum canoe as its main signature. Regarding the politics, they are both relatively similar as they're both parliamentary, though Trinidad and Tobago is a republic since 1976 as there's no monarch, while the Bahamas is still a constitutional monarchy with the British monarch as the head state. Trinidad and Tobago has a two-party system often reflected in ethnic divisions, Afro versus Indo-Trinidadians, with oil and gas wealth being prominent in the country, and it gives it a stronger regional economic clout. While the Bahamas is stable democratically, the politics is largely personality and party driven without strong ethnic division, which makes sense if you look at the population, and the economy is heavily reliant on tourism and offshore banking. So the key contrast here is Trinidad is a republic, the politics is tied to ethnicity, resource economy, while the Bahamas is a monarchy, politics is less about ethnicity, and tourism and finance are huge economically there. When it comes to the infrastructure, Trinidad and Tobago has one of the most industrialized Caribbean states thanks to the oil and natural gas being huge there. There are more developed ports, energy infrastructure, and industrial facilities there. And the urban problems, i.e., crime and congestion, are present but are still relatively advanced by regional standards. While the Bahamas has a high GDP per capita, but the infrastructure is connected in Nassau, i.e., New Providence, and Freeport, i.e., Grand Bahama. The outer islands, so the quote unquote family islands, are less developed. And I guess that makes sense, especially with the Bahamas being fragmented, a bunch of fragmented islands, while Trinidad and Tobago is just two islands that are larger. Tourism infrastructure is very strong in the Bahamas, but it has a limited manufacturing industry. So the key contrast here is that Trinidad is industrial and energy driven, while Bahamas is tourism and finance driven, with uneven development across the islands. The fifth and final category is the geography, where Trinidad and Tobago is based off of two islands that are off the coast of Venezuela. Trinidad is the larger oil-rich island with mountains, plains, and swamps, while Tobago is the smaller, scenic, more tourism-focused island. While the Bahamas is an archipelago of 700 islands, oh wow, I didn't know it's that much, and 2,000 kais, which is more sparsely populated. It has a flat limestone terrain with no mountains, which makes sense, and it's extremely vulnerable to hurricanes and sea level rise. So the key contrast here is that Trinidad is compact, mountainous, resource-rich twin island state, while the Bahamas is a vast low-lying archipelago, heavily climate vulnerable and less natural resources. So the overall comparison, i.e. the quick take, is that Trinidad and Tobago is industrialized, oil-rich republic, where it is that. It's ethnically diverse and it's famous for carnival and multiculturalism, while the Bahamas is tourism and banking based. When it comes to their monarchy, it has a mostly Afro-descendant population. It's culturally defined by Cano and its island lifestyle, and it's very geographically fragile. At third place is Guyana, and I'm shocked, but not shocked at the same time that it's only at third. I thought it would be higher at number one because there's a lot of similarities when it comes to their culture and their demographics and stuff like that, since they're both Afro-Indio countries. But I can understand why it was third, especially when it comes to the geography and it's being very different from one another. Anyways, let's get into the demographics. So both of them have equal Indo and Afro populations, where the Afro population in Trinidad is 35% compared to its Indo Trinidadian presence, which is also 35%. With Guyana, it's a bit more Indo leaning than Afro leaning, as the Indo Guyanese population is 40%, while the Afro Guyanese is 30%. Both of them have a decent mixed race population, which is mainly Dagla, which are people who are half Indian, half African. Both of them have 20% mixed population, while Guyana has a 10% indigenous population, which Trinidad doesn't really have. Guyana has 800k people, while Trinidad and Tobago has twice the amount of people with 1.5 million people. So the key contrast is both are highly diverse with Indo and Afro-descendant populations of a similar size, but Guyana has a stronger indigenous presence at 10%, while Trinidad has a more mixed race and immigrant minority presence. When it comes to the culture, Trinidad and Tobago is huge in carnival, calypso, soca, chutney, and steel pan, and it's a nice blend of African and Indian influences in the festivals, cuisine, and music. With Guyana, its culture is less globally famous, but it's very similar to Trinidad when it comes to the Afro-Indian fusion. Fagua, Oli, and Diwali are widely celebrated alongside Mashrami, Republic Day Carnival. Don't mind me if or when I mispronounce some of these words. The cuisine blends Indian roti and curries with Afro-Caribbean dishes, not surprising. There's a strong literary and political intellectual tradition. Example, Walter Rodney and Martin Carter. So the key contrast is Trinidad is a cultural exporter via Carnival, soca, and steel pan with global recognition, while Guyana has similar cultural mix but less global reach, with more emphasis on intellectual and poetic traditions. Very interesting. I should look into that more. When it comes to the politics, both of them are very similar as they're both parliamentary republics. While Trinidad has a two-party dominance, often divided along ethnic lines, P and M versus UMC, while Guyana has a history of authoritarianism and political unrest, but it's currently democratic. Its politics is also sharply divided along ethnic lines, Indo versus Afghanese, and it's often more tense than Trinidad in comparison. I should do more research on that too. Trinidad and Tobago has a stable but crime challenges. Sorry, Trinidad and Tobago is stable, but the crime challenges governance there, while I mentioned Guyana's case already. Guyana has a recent oil boom that gives Guyana a massive new geopolitical significance. And I know this happened literally like a few months ago, and I know there's some conflict with Venezuela there due to some borders. It'll be interesting to see the development of that in the future. So the key contrast with both in this element, both are republics with ethnic voting patterns. Trinidad's system is reliably stable, while Guyana's history has been more volatile, but its oil wealth is transforming its political and economic clout. The fourth category is the infrastructure. With Trinidad and Tobago, it is industrialized with strong oil and gas infrastructure. The ports, they have ports, energy sector, and telecoms are fairly advanced there. And there are urban issues like crime, congestion, and inequality. With Guyana, it is historically underdeveloped as there's limited transport networks, power reliability issues, and a weak healthcare. There are massive new oil revenues that promise rapid modernization, so it'd be interesting to see how that develops. And it's overall relatively rural, and the hinterland areas are very underserved compared to the coast, where that's where the urbanization is. Key contrast. So Trinidad is already industrialized, while Guyana is and has been historically underdeveloped, but now it's on the verge of rapid oil-driven transformation. At fifth is geography. So Trinidad and Tobago, it's two islands off of the coast of Venezuela. Trinidad is more mountainous, has plains, and is oil-rich, while Tobago is smaller and more tourism-centered. Guyana is on the mainland South America and is part of the Guyana Shield. 80% of it is covered in rainforest that I did remember from prior research. It has famous natural landmarks like the Kaitor Falls, Essequibo River. The interior is sparsely populated and most people live along the coastal strip. So the key contrast, Trinidad is small, compact, island-based, and resource-rich, while Guyana is a large mainland territory, rainforest-heavy, and sparsely populated inland with a dense coastal sediment pattern. So here is the overall comparison quick take. Trinidad and Tobago, industrialized island republic, culturally famous for carnival with a balanced Afro and Indo-descendant population and strong oil-based infrastructure. Guyana, mainland republic, culturally similar, Afro-Indian fusion but less globalized, historically underdeveloped but rapidly rising as a new oil power with vast rainforest and a strong indigenous presence. Obviously, you can see it on the screen here, but I forgot to mention that the overall score when it comes to comparing it to Guyana is 75.1. At fourth, we have Belize, and the total score is 71.3. So it's definitely a decent amount lower than the other three. I see the main difference here is the demographics, but it doesn't really seem like it has anything higher than 3/4 worth into the government, but we'll go into the comparisons. When it comes to the demographics, Trinidad and Tobago has 1 million more people than Belize does, where the population of Belize is for 50K, while the population in Trinidad and Tobago is 1.5 million. As we've gone over already, it's pretty much an even split between Afro-Trinidadians and Indo-Trinidadians, each having 35%, with the other 20% being mixed people, plus smaller European, Chinese, and Syrian, Lebanese, and indigenous minorities. And the main religion is very diverse between Christianity, Hinduism, and Islam. With Belize, like you mentioned, the population is 450K. The population groups are Mestizo, which is at 50%, 25% is Creole. I don't know if that's supposed to be African or not. I don't know. It's not really clear. 10% is Indigenous Mayan, 6% is Garifuna, plus smaller Mennonite, East Indian, Chinese, and European populations. Religiously, they are mostly Christian, but they're also Garifuna spirituality and Maya traditions. So key contrast when it comes to the demographics. Trinidad, mainly Afro-Indian Caribbean balance. Belize, more Central American mix, Mestizo plus Maya, with strong Afro-Caribbean Creole and Garifuna presence. It's interesting because for years, Belize was known as very Afro-descendant, but I guess it changed in more recent years. I have to do more research on that. At second is, sorry, the second category is culture, with Trinidad and Tobago, like I've mentioned already, heavy carnival, calypso, soca, steel pan, and chutney with Afro-Indian fusion that's visible in festivals, food, and music, and it's known internationally for the carnival and steel pan as unique cultural exports. With Belize, it's heavily English-speaking. It's no shocker that all the countries discussed so far are Anglo countries, but it's culturally a Caribbean and Central American hybrid. Afro-Caribbean influences through Creole culture, Garifuna drumming, and Ponta music, while indigenous Maya traditions also remain visible through the language, rituals, and the ruins. Mestizo culture is dominant in food and family life like tamelas and marimba. So the key contrast here is Trinidad is a multicultural Afro-Indian fusion with global cultural exports, while Belize is an Afro-Caribbean plus Central American fusion, and it's less globally visible, but it's uniquely blended. The third category is politics, with Trinidad and Tobago having a parliamentary republic that has no monarch, two-party politics with ethnic divisions, like I've already discussed, and oil wealth gives it a stronger economic independence, but also crime challenges. With Belize, it is a parliamentary constitutional monarchy, so a British monarchy as the head of state. That's not surprising. It has a stable democracy, but small and reliant on foreign relations. Interesting. It has an ongoing territorial dispute with Guatemala over its borders. That I want to do my research on eventually. Key contrast: Trinidad, republic, resource economy, ethnic-based politics, with Belize, monarchy, small state politics, and border tensions. When it comes to the infrastructure, Trinidad and Tobago is industrialized with oil and natural gas fueling, strong energy and industrial infrastructure. It's relatively advanced by regional standards via the ports, transport, and telecoms, while Belize it is very underdeveloped compared to Trinidad. Its roads, healthcare, and utilities are limited in rural and indigenous areas. The economy relies on tourism, agriculture, and services, not heavy industry. The key contrast is Trinidad has a lot of industrial and energy-based infrastructure, while Belize has a lot of rural, tourism, and agricultural-based weaker infrastructure. When it comes to the geography, Trinidad and Tobago's two islands, Trinidad is more oil-rich, mountainous, while Tobago is smaller and more tourism-driven. With Belize, it is in mainland Central America with a Caribbean coastline, so I guess that explains some of the Afro population being there due to it being on the coast of the Caribbean. The features include rainforests, savannas, rivers, and Maya Mountains, while the offshore has the Belize Barrier Reef, which is on the UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's a mix of Caribbean coast plus Central American interior. Key contrast when it comes to the geography: Trinidad, compact twin island states near South America; Belize, mainland territory with both Caribbean coast and inland Central American geography. The overall comparison quick take with these countries is Trinidad and Tobago is a multicultural republic with an Afro-Indian balance, industrialized oil economy, and world-famous carnival and music, while Belize is a small monarchy, mestizo, Maya, Creole, Garifuna mix, ecotourism, and reef-driven economy, with Central American plus Caribbean cultural fusion. And the final spot in the top five goes to Suriname with a score of 70.3. So it's interesting that fourth and fifth place are pretty close, while the top three are relatively distant when it came from the other two when it comes to the score, but close enough together. So just from looking at here, the main difference between the two involves the government, infrastructure, and geography. So it'll be interesting to get into all of that. Well, the demo and culture is higher. So with the demographics, Suriname has a population of 600K, while Trinidad and Tobago has 1.5 million, so over double the population for Trinidad and Tobago. Like I mentioned earlier, roughly equal Afro-Trinidadian and Indo-Trinidadians, both having 30%, 20% mixed plus smaller, Chinese, Syrian plus Lebanese, European and indigenous minorities. It's a religiously diverse country with Christianity, Hinduism, and Islam being the main three. With Suriname, it's a very plural population with Hindustani, so East Indian, I'm assuming Hindustani. Is that Pakistani? I don't know the wording, or is that an area in India? I don't know. Anyways, the East Indian population is 27%. It has Maroons at 22%. I'm assuming Maroons are African because in the Caribbean that term is usually used for the African descended people, but I'm not too sure about the context in Suriname. I don't know if Creoles also involves African people, like it did for Belize, but the Creole people are at 16%. Javanese, I know that's another Asian group, that's at 15%. Indigenous is at 3%, and there are smaller Chinese, European, and mixed populations. The religions are also relatively diverse, which includes Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Winti, and Javanese traditions. So the key contrast with both is that they're both diverse, but Trinidad is mainly Afro-Indian with some minorities, while Suriname has a much more fragmented mix that involves Indo, Afro, Javanese, Indigenous, and Chinese populations. So when it comes to the culture, Trinidad and Tobago is a global cultural exporter through Carnival, Calypso, Soca, Steel Pan, and Chutney. There's huge African and Indian heritages that dominate music, festivals, and cuisine. With Suriname, it is extremely multicultural, with Surinamese traditions that involves Winti religion and Cacique music. Hindustani Bollywood-style music and festivals is also huge there, with Javanese cuisine and rituals, indigenous contributions being present too. Dutch is the official language of the country. Swanantongo, which is a Creole, is also widely spoken in the country. Cultural life is less globally known, but it's rich in diversity. So key contrast. Trinidad exports Carnival and soca globally. Suriname's cultural mix is more unique and locally blended, but less internationally visible. With the politics, you start to see the differences here, where Trinidad is a parliamentary republic since 1976. It's a two-party system that's mainly divided by ethnic lines, and it's generally stable democratically, though crime and corruption are challenges for them. With Suriname, it is a presidential republic and it has a huge history of coups and military rule, especially under the Desi Bouterse. Today, it is democratic, but it's still grappling with corruption and weak institutions. The key contrast is Trinidad's more stable, ethnic-based party politics, while Suriname is more turbulent when it comes to its history, presidential system with stronger personality-driven politics being present too. The infrastructure for Trinidad and Tobago is that it's one of the most industrialized states in the Caribbean with oil and natural gas fueling strong infrastructure with advanced energy, transport, and telecoms, though crime affects urban development. With Suriname, its infrastructure is concentrated in Paramaribo and coastal areas, which I'm assuming that's where the immigration's most populous. The interior, where maroon and indigenous communities live, lack roads, utilities, and services, so obviously that's based on racial urban planning. I learned that term a few days ago during a seminar. The economy is reliant on mining, gold and bauxite, agriculture, and now oil exploration. I'm assuming that's due to its closeness to Guyana, location-wise. The key contrast is Trinidad is more energy rich and has a developed infrastructure, while Suriname is uneven developmentally and has a strong urban core but underdeveloped interior. At number five, the fifth category is the geography. Trinidad and Tobago is a twin island state, my bad, off Venezuela. Trinidad is more oil rich in resources, while Tobago is smaller and more tourism based. Suriname is on mainland South America, north of Brazil. 90% of it is covered by rainforest. It's part of the Guyana Shield. Most people live in the narrow coastal strip. Huge rivers, Suriname, Maroni, Corantigan dominates the landscape. The key contrast here is Trinidad is small, resource rich, and has two islands near South America, while Suriname is a large rainforest territory that's sparsely populated inland with dense coastal settlements. The overall comparison, and a quick take of this, is Trinidad and Tobago is a multicultural twin island republic, Afro-Indian balance, industrialized oil economy, world-famous carnival and soca. Suriname is a mainland rainforest republic, extremely multi-ethnic via Hindustani, Maroon, Creole, Javanese, and indigenous populations. It is Dutch-speaking, and it's politically turbulent but unique in cultural diversity. So now we're moving on to the honorable mentions. And if I extended this to the top 10, this would be 6 to 10 in the order that I'm reading it. So Puerto Rico, Mauritius, Panama, Fiji, and the Dominican Republic. Most of these aren't surprising. Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic are Caribbean countries, and they have a large mixed race population, though the mixture is different than Trinidad. Fiji also has a lot of diversity in it compared to other Melanesian countries. They're both high in tourism. Panama, I think it's here because it's more Afro-descended compared to some of the other Latin American countries. I don't know. And I know Mauritius is also a very huge multi-ethnic and multiracial country. So anyways, I'm just going to be brief descriptions for each of them. So, Puerto Rico, like Trinidad, it's an island in the Caribbean, but it is a U.S. territory, not an independent country. It's predominantly Spanish speaking, mostly mixed race of European plus African plus indigenous, economies tied to the U.S., strong music and dance culture. Trinidad is independent, English speaking, and more ethnically Afro Indian balanced. Mauritius, another small island nation with a multi-ethnic population, Indo-Mauritian, Afro-Mauritian, Chinese, French. Like Trinidad, it blends African and Indian influences, but it is in the Indian Ocean. Economies based on finance, tourism, sugar and service, not oil and gas. Panama, mainland Central America, Spanish-speaking, cosmopolitan due to the canal, more focused on trade and banking than cultural festivities. Interesting, I didn't know that. Trinidad is an economy. Panama is a continental transit hub. Fiji, Pacific Islander states with Indo-Fijian and indigenous Fijian populations. Very similar demographic balance to Trinidad's Afro and Indo split. Interesting, I should look more into that. Politics in both countries shaped by ethnic voting patterns. Fiji is more rural and tourism driven. Trinidad is industrialized and energy driven. The Dominican Republic. Caribbean neighbor Spanish-speaking, predominantly mixed race, European plus African, with some indigenous heritage, much larger population than Trinidad, more reliant on tourism and remittances. Trinidad is smaller, English-speaking, and more industrialized with oil and west. So compared to Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, those two are Spanish-speaking Caribbean cousins, but not as industrialized. Mauritius and Fiji, they are distant island parallels, sharing Trinidad's ethnomix, Indo plus Afro, but with different oceans and economies. And Panama, mainland trade hub, more globalized through the canal, while Trinidad is a Caribbean oil hub. So when I look at the scores of these five countries, using the objective lists that I use for the top five, they're all in the 64 to 68 percentage rate when it comes to compatibility totals. In conclusion, that ends my 5 countries most similar to Trinidad and Tobago video. It's really interesting going through these videos and focusing specifically on Caribbean countries and seeing the countries most like them. And it kind of shows that despite a lot of these Caribbean and even some Central and South American countries being either Hispanic, Francophone, or Anglophone, there's still a lot of similarities there that deserve to be cherished. And there are elements of all these countries that have, I don't want to say just a Caribbean culture, but I guess a southern the equator culture, if you know what I mean. I don't know. There's a lot of similarities between the tropical Americas. I guess that's a better way of putting it. So I'm going to continue doing similar videos like this and other videos of random topics that I feel like, whether it involves the Caribbean or anything of the African diaspora. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with more soon. Bye!